NextGen is the process that will ultimately create a new technology landscape for Minnesota State, one that meets the changing needs of our students and our campuses. This video provides an overview of the implementation approach and key dates for the groups going through implementation. Dates and details in this video may change as we begin planning the implementation with Workday. Minnesota State has selected Workday as the technology for this new landscape. Workday is a modern, integrated commercial administrative system, also known as an Enterprise Resource Planning Tool, or ERP. As you will see, the change Minnesota State is making will take time because of the complexity of replacing one technology and the business processes that accompany it with the new technology. NextGen is a two-phase project. Phase 1 began in 2015. Over the last 5 years, Phase 1 included listening sessions that helped make the case for a new ERP, and feedback gathered from regional review sessions across the state to map both the current and future state of business processes, which ultimately informed the request for proposal that led to the selection of Workday. Phase 2 begins in late 2020 and focuses on the implementation of Workday throughout Minnesota State. Implementation will have 3 groups transitioning to Workday at 2 different overlapping times. The first implementation group will be Finance and Human Resources. Due to dependencies between Finance and Human Resources, a decision was made to manage these implementations in parallel, aligning to a fiscal year start. The second implementation group will be Student Services. The NextGen project concludes when all implementations are complete at the end of 2026. At that point, all areas will have been moved into ongoing operations of Workday. Planning for how implementation will move forward begins in January 2021 and concludes in March 2021. This work includes finalizing the project timeline and identifying project team members. Project teams will be described later in this video. Plans for Finance and Human Resources will include a great deal of detail. Plans for Student Services will be high level at this point, with teams and timeline plans coming prior to the Student Services implementation. Here's how implementation will work for Finance and Human Resources. Teams and timeline plans for implementation will be complete in March 2021. Project teams will be identified, and the timeline and methodology for implementation will be determined. Subject matter experts will have the ability to provide feedback on how Workday is configured. Strategies for change management, communication, and training will be finalized. Between March and July 2021, the scope of the project will be finalized. Scope means identifying which tools and system functionality will be included in NextGen, and also which technology gaps require resolution. In other words, determining which of our current third-party solutions will no longer be needed. During the period between July 2021 and May 2023, NextGen teams will configure and test the new tool. That means the teams will finalize configuration requirements and business processes, update communication and training plans, complete the configuration of the Workday service, and prepare for the transition from ISRS to Workday, and new business processes. Training for Minnesota State Finance and HR staff will begin during this phase. Though plans will be finalized here, they will continue to evolve as the project progresses. Finance and HR users will use Workday for the new fiscal year starting in July 2023. Between July 2023 and June 2024, issues identified by end users will be documented and prioritized for resolution by how critical they are. The NextGen team, with assistance from Workday, will address as many issues as possible within the warranty period. In many ways, implementation for Student Services will follow a similar process to the one shown for Finance and Human Resources. But because of the size and complexity of Student Services, some aspects of implementation will be unique for this group. For one thing, implementation will take longer. That's because the scope of the student implementation is much larger compared to Finance and HR. Student Services also supports more processes and requires changes not only for staff, but for faculty and students as well. As mentioned earlier, from December 2020 to February 2021, all implementation groups will plan how implementation will move forward. At the start of the student services implementation, plans will still only be high level. But that changes in October 2022 when detailed implementation planning begins, work that includes finalizing the student services timeline and identifying project team members. Planning will conclude in July 2023. Between July 2023 and January 2024, the scope of the project will be finalized for student services. Identifying which tools and system functionality will be included in NextGen for student services, and also which technology gaps require resolution. During the 18 months between January 2024 and July 2025, student services will move through designing, configuring, and testing Workday, just as Finance and Human Resources did. This is when training for student services end users will begin. Where implementation differs for student services is in the final period in the Minnesota State deployment of Workday, between July 2025 and October 2026. Compared to the implementation for Finance and Human Resources, what's different for student services is the timing of implementation for 5 subgroups, called implementation milestones, each of which will move through implementation individually. Milestone 1 will consist of student recruiting, admissions, application fees, deposits, student core, academic calendars, and programs of study. These functions will transition to using Workday in late summer, early fall 2025. Milestone 2 will consist of institutional student information record load, financial aid for new students, course catalog, and class schedule. These functions will transition to using Workday in late fall, early winter 2025. Milestone 3 will consist of registration, advising, financial for continuing students, the tuition and fee calculator, and waivers. These functions will transition to using Workday in late winter, early spring 2026. Milestone 4 will consist of billing, payment plans, and return of Title IV funds. These functions will transition to using Workday in late spring, early summer 2026. Milestone 5 will consist of grading, add, drop, withdrawal, transcripts, disbursement, and refunds for financial aid. These functions will transition to using Workday in late summer, early fall 2026. Between October 2026 and August 2027, issues identified by end users will be documented and prioritized for resolution by their criticality. The NextGen team, with assistance from Workday, will address as many issues as possible within the warranty period. Any issue that cannot be addressed within the time allotted will have a plan and timeline for resolution. Thank you for taking the time to learn about the NextGen project timeline for implementation. For more detailed information on everything in this video, go to mennstate.edu/Friends of NextGen.